Have you ever loved someone so deeply that you gave them every part of yourself, your time, your heart, your patience, only to be met with silence, half love, and emotional distance? Some wounds aren't loud. They linger in the quiet moments, where your effort was met with indifference, where your loyalty was mistaken for weakness, where your presence was taken as something permanent, not precious. You stood there, fully open, heart in hand, hoping they would see you, hoping they would choose you. But they didn't. They never believed you'd walk away. They thought your love had no edges, that you would always return, no matter how carelessly they treated what you gave. But you did leave, not with anger, not with noise, but with silence. The kind of silence that speaks of self-respect, of exhaustion, of finally choosing to stop bleeding for someone who never brought a bandage. And now, everything has changed. The same silence they once ignored has become deafening. Now they search for traces of the you they once knew, scrolling through memories, asking about you, trying to feel something that's already slipped through their hands. Because here's the truth: they didn't care when you left, because they never thought you truly would. But this isn't a story about revenge. This is a story about awakening, about the moment you stop waiting to be seen and start remembering who you were before you forgot yourself for someone else. In this video, we'll uncover 7 psychology-backed reasons why they didn't care when you walked away, but why your absence now follows them like a shadow. If you've ever poured love into someone who couldn't receive it, this message is for you. And if it resonates, like, subscribe, and join the community at Stoic Station, where we turn silence into strength and healing into purpose. Let's begin. 1. They felt nothing until you were gone. You were the quiet strength in their life, the one who never made a scene, who never asked for more than you gave. You were steady, dependable, always showing up, even when your soul was tired and your heart was carrying more than it should have. You brought calm into their chaos, and over time, that consistency became invisible. They stopped noticing the way you checked in, the gentle encouragement, the soft good nights that carried more love than words could say. They mistook your patience for passivity, your kindness for neediness, and your presence for permanence. They thought you'd always be there, and maybe, for a long time, you believed that too. You held on, not because you were weak, but because you hoped that one day they'd see you, that they'd value the little things, that they'd wake up and realize the depth of your love wasn't ordinary, wasn't replaceable. But they didn't. They continued to take you for granted, blind to the fact that showing up consistently is a choice, not a guarantee. So you made a different choice. You didn't leave in a blaze of anger. You didn't shout or slam doors. You simply stopped over-explaining, stopped softening your needs, stopped showing up for someone who only noticed your absence when the silence settled in. You didn't leave to hurt them. You left to heal yourself, not to teach them a lesson, but to honor the one you finally learned, that staying where you aren't seen will only shrink your soul. And now your absence has become a mirror, a reflection they can't avoid. The empty space where your love once lived is louder than your presence ever was. They feel the loss in the quiet moments, the songs you loved, the conversations that no longer happen, the steady support that vanished without drama. It's only now, in your silence, that they finally hear the echo of everything you once offered. But while they sit with the realization, you're no longer looking back. You're no longer trying to be remembered. You're remembering yourself, your value, your peace. You didn't leave because you stopped caring. You left because you finally started caring for yourself. And that decision, rooted in clarity, not resentment, is what sets you free. 2. They didn't notice when you needed them most. You were exhausted, but still showed up. Still asked how their day was, still remembered the small things that mattered to them, still tried to make them feel seen, even when you were quietly fading. That wasn't weakness. That was emotional strength. That was love without a price tag, given freely, even when it cost you more than you could afford. And yet, they never looked beyond your smile. They never asked the questions that mattered. They didn't hear the quiet sadness in your voice or notice how long you stared into silence before answering. They didn't see that every word of encouragement you gave was one you desperately needed to hear yourself. You were present, but barely holding on. Still, you poured from your nearly empty cup, hoping they'd notice, not just your presence, but your pain. But they didn't. Maybe they were distracted. Maybe they assumed you'd always be strong. Maybe they simply didn't care enough to ask. And by the time they did, by the time they finally wondered why your texts came slower, why your tone was colder, why your eyes no longer carried the same warmth, you were already slipping away. You had already started building a life where being ignored wasn't part of your reality. Now they realize it wasn't about losing someone who needed them. It was about losing someone who deserved to be chosen, someone who showed up even when no one showed up for them, someone whose strength had limits, whose silence had meaning, and whose loyalty came from a place of real depth. And you? You're no longer waiting to be noticed. You're no longer bending yourself into silence hoping they'll listen. You're walking in your worth now. You understand that love given freely is powerful, but love that demands you disappear to be appreciated is no longer love you're willing to keep chasing. 3. You were breaking inside and they looked the other way. You were the man who kept showing up, even when your soul was unraveling beneath the surface. You smiled through the weight of being unseen. You made space for their needs while silently suppressing your own. You stood strong, not because you were unbreakable, but because you thought love meant enduring, even when it felt one-sided. And the real tragedy wasn't just that they didn't notice your pain. It was that they expected you to carry it, quietly. They became so used to your strength that they stopped asking how you were holding up. They didn't see the fatigue in your eyes or the hesitation in your voice. They didn't wonder why your laughter became less frequent, why your presence felt heavier. You were breaking inside, but they kept looking away, believing that as long as you didn't speak the words aloud, the cracks didn't exist. But something changed. You stopped trying to explain the silence growing inside you. You no longer justified the distance between you. You let the stillness speak what your words never could. In that silence, you didn't find resentment. You found clarity. You found the quiet truth that some people will only value you when your energy is no longer available to them. And now, they remember the version of you they thought would never leave. The dependable one, the one who forgave, stayed, endured. But that man, he's gone. Not lost, not bitter, just reborn. He no longer gives himself to those who only notice when he's gone. He no longer offers his peace to those who treated it as background noise. You didn't disappear out of spite. You stepped away out of self-respect. And in doing so, you became something they never expected. Free. You know now what presence truly means. It means showing up fully, but only for those who see you, value you, and choose you in return. And that kind of man, he doesn't chase validation. He walks in his truth and never looks back. 4. Or they thought you were waiting, but you were healing. They thought you were stuck in the past, trapped in that moment when they walked away without looking back. In their mind, you were replaying every word, analyzing every silence, holding onto a story that was no longer being written. They imagined you sitting with your phone, scrolling through memories, wondering if they missed you, if they'd return. But what they never understood was the quiet strength it takes to not reach out. The discipline behind your silence wasn't fueled by longing, it was built on self-respect. You weren't waiting, you were healing. While they drowned themselves in distractions, you sat with your discomfort. You didn't avoid the pain, you faced it head-on. You journaled the emotions that felt too heavy to carry in conversation. You went for walks without needing a destination, allowing nature to breathe life back into you. You read books that reminded you who you were before the heartbreak. You spoke to mentors, sought wisdom, learned to sit still without being consumed. And slowly, day by day, you started coming back to yourself. This wasn't a dramatic transformation. Healing never is. It happened in the quiet mornings when the world was still, and you finally stopped checking if they had watched your stories. It happened when the ache in your chest no longer controlled your thoughts. It happened when you realized that the life you were rebuilding didn't need them in it to feel meaningful. You began setting new goals, not to impress them, not to prove your worth, but because you remembered your own potential. And now, while they still assume you're suspended in the same grief they left behind, they're shocked to find you living again, laughing again, rising again. You didn't disappear into heartbreak. You didn't crumble under the weight of what was lost. You transformed. You emerged from it, not desperate for closure, but full of clarity. Not bitter, but better. Not waiting, but free. 5. They didn't expect you to outgrow the pain. They believed the pain would define you, that you'd wear it like a chain, dragging it through every room you entered, shrinking under the weight of what they left behind. In their mind, you would be stuck, repeating the same memories, clinging to what was, unable to move forward without their validation. They didn't just expect you to hurt. They expected you to stay hurting. And yes, for a while, it broke you. That part is true. The nights were long, the mornings hollow. You questioned your worth, your choices, your voice. You relived conversations that had no closure and carried emotions too heavy for any one heart. But you didn't stay there. You let the pain do what it was meant to do, not to destroy you, but to open something deeper. You used it as fuel, not to prove them wrong, but to finally start showing up for yourself. You turned inward. You started focusing on your health, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. You realigned with your purpose. You surrounded yourself with people who didn't just take your light, but helped it grow. You joined new communities that challenged you to evolve. You picked up books that helped you see beyond the story you had been stuck in. You moved with quiet intention, not for attention, but because you remembered who you were before they dimmed your fire. Now, you walk differently. You speak with presence. Your confidence no longer comes from needing to be chosen, but from knowing that you've already chosen yourself. You set boundaries without apology. You carry peace not because everything is perfect, but because you've made peace with imperfection. And they look back, confused. They don't recognize the man you've become. But that's okay. You didn't grow to be recognized. You didn't heal to make a statement. You evolved to be whole. And the most powerful part of that transformation, it happened without them. While they assumed you'd be trapped in the past, you were outgrowing every version of yourself that had once accepted less. 6. They realized too late. You were their safe place. In a world that never stops shouting, you were the quiet they didn't know they needed. You were the steady breath in the chaos, the grounded presence that didn't demand attention but offered peace. While they chased moments that felt exciting on the surface, you gave them something deeper: stability, understanding, and unwavering care. But they were too distracted by sparks to recognize the warmth of a steady flame. They thought love needed to be loud, dramatic, full of adrenaline. They didn't realize that the rarest kind of love doesn't burn. it anchors. You listened when they didn't know how to speak. You stayed when they didn't know how to ask you to. You gave them space to be confused, to be vulnerable, to fall apart. And while you were holding space for them, they assumed you'd always be there. They mistook your quiet loyalty for something ordinary, even boring. They confused your calm with complacency, and so they kept looking elsewhere, not realizing that every other connection was built on noise, not meaning. But eventually, reality set in. Now they find themselves surrounded by shallow bonds, people who speak but don't listen, who stay only when it's convenient. They experience temporary highs that leave them emptier than before. And suddenly, they remember you, not as someone they dated, but as the one place that truly felt like home. The one person who saw them when they didn't have the words to explain themselves. The one who made them feel safe without ever having to ask for it. But it's too late. Because while they were off searching for more, you were discovering your own worth. You finally understood that being someone's safe place is a gift, not a given. You weren't just someone who cared. You were home. And they didn't recognize how rare that was until they tried to return and found the door no longer open. Not because you closed it in anger, but because you outgrew being a resting place for someone who never planned to stay. 7. You let go, and that's what finally broke them. Letting go was never about walking away in bitterness. It wasn't some grand statement meant to leave them wondering or regretting. It was quiet. It was still. It was one of the hardest things you've ever had to do, not because you couldn't live without them, but because for so long you thought they were worth holding on to. But holding on began to feel like drowning. The late replies, the empty promises, the emotional guessing games. You kept hoping things would get better, that the potential you saw in them would finally rise to the surface and meet you where you stood. But it never did. And so, you made the most powerful decision of all. You let go. You didn't let go because you stopped caring. You let go because you couldn't keep sacrificing your peace for confusion. You couldn't keep investing in almosts and maybes that left you feeling small. You didn't leave to punish them. You left to stop punishing yourself. And in that decision, you chose truth over hope, clarity over chaos, and self-worth over the illusion of love. Now they sit with the silence. And it's not just the absence of your presence, it's the absence of your energy. You're no longer checking in, no longer over-explaining, no longer waiting for them to finally show up. You've stopped hoping for the version of them that existed only in your mind. And that silence? It's louder than any words you could have ever said. It speaks of endings not wrapped in drama, but in quiet realization. It tells the story of someone who stayed too long, gave too much, and finally understood that love should never cost your sense of self. You're not chasing closure anymore. You're living it. You don't need apologies or explanations. You've written your own ending, one that doesn't circle back to the past, but moves steadily toward the life you were always meant to live. You didn't lose anything by walking away. You released someone who never truly chose you. And in doing so, you gained everything. Mornings free from overthinking, nights untouched by emotional chaos, friendships that nourish your spirit, and goals that actually excite you. You've returned to yourself, the version of you that was always whole, always worthy, just buried beneath the weight of trying to be enough for someone who never saw it. They didn't care when you left. Maybe they even thought you'd be back, that your silence was temporary, that your absence was performative. But now, as the days stretch into weeks and the silence holds steady, it's hitting them in ways they never expected. Not because you left in anger, but because you left with dignity, because you didn't beg, didn't try to make them see. You simply saw yourself, maybe for the first time in a long time. And now you walk forward, not with resentment, but with resolve, not with longing, but with peace in your chest and power in your stride. There comes a moment in every man's life when silence becomes more powerful than words, when absence speaks louder than effort, and when letting go is no longer a reaction, but a decision. Through everything I've shared, I'm reminded of something deeply personal. Sometimes it's not the heartbreak that hurts the most, but the realization that you kept showing up for someone who never really saw you. You gave your time, your energy, your quiet strength, and they mistook it all for permanence. They thought your love had no limit, that your presence required no effort, that you would stay no matter how invisible they made you feel. But the beauty in all of this isn't found in the pain, it's found in the transformation. You didn't leave with bitterness, you left with clarity. You didn't stop loving, you started loving yourself more. And that shift, that quiet, powerful shift, is what changed everything. Each of these moments, their indifference, their silence, their late realizations, weren't signs that you were unworthy. They were signs that you were growing, that you were beginning to understand the difference between someone who values you and someone who simply uses your presence as emotional convenience. And now, your silence isn't a punishment. It's peace. Your absence isn't a statement. It's freedom. And your healing, that's not for anyone else to notice. It's for you to live. The lesson here is simple, but not easy. Never stay where you have to prove your worth to be seen. Never pour endlessly into a connection that only drains you, and never mistake endurance for love. In today's world where people chase noise, confusion, and temporary highs, being someone who offers calm, clarity, and presence is rare, but that presence must be earned, not begged for, and certainly not wasted on those who only recognize your value once you're gone. So if you've been through this, if you recognize yourself in these words, here's my advice. Stop chasing closure, start building peace. Stop over-explaining. Start honoring your boundaries. Stop waiting to be chosen. Start choosing yourself. Because the truth is, they may not have cared when you left, but one day they'll feel it. And you? You'll be too far along your path of healing, purpose, and quiet strength to ever look back. If this message reached a quiet place within you, let it be a reminder that your silence is not emptiness, it is strength. Your peace is not weakness, it is power. And the absence you leave behind in someone's life will echo far louder than the words they never listened to. You are not defined by who walked away, but by how you chose to rise afterward, with grace, clarity, and quiet dignity. If this spoke to your journey, I invite you to stay connected. Like this video, subscribe to Stoic Station, and share it with someone who needs this truth. Because your healing is not the end of the story, it's the beginning of something greater, and you're just getting started.